The Sangha is invited to come back to our breathing so that the collective energy of mindfulness will bring us together as an organism, going as a river with no more separation. Let the whole Sangha breathe as one body, chant as one body, listen as one body, transcending the boundaries of a delusive self, liberating us from the superiority complex, the inferiority complex, and the equality complex.
The community will stand up and greet our friends who will be sharing the Dharma. Bow to the Buddha first.
Okay.
We'll bow to the Sangha. Please consolidate, move forward, dear.
Dear teacher, dear community, welcome to our first at this retreat. It's very wonderful to see all your faces. I had so much fun walking over to breakfast and just seeing everyone there joyfully eating together. This morning we are going to enjoy a presentation on the 5 mindfulness trainings. And I just wanted to know, by a show of hands, who here has never heard of the 5 mindfulness trainings? Could you raise your hands? Thank you. And who here has received the 5 mindfulness trainings? Wonderful. Thank you. So this morning I will be facilitating the presentation, and these wonderful people will be our panelists to share with us about each of the trainings. I'd like to introduce them to you now. Next to me is Joanna. She is a co-facilitator of WakeUp New York. So some of you here may know her, or if you visit New York and get a chance to practice with them, they practice on Friday evenings, so you might see her there. I asked her for a fun fact, and she said that her spirit vegetable is a sweet potato. So next time you enjoy a sweet potato, you can also enjoy Joanna. Next, we have Brandon. You may notice we have a few more brothers and sisters on our panel. Someone was feeling unwell, so he volunteered to be here today. And I asked him for a fun fact, and he shared he lived in Dubai for 2 years, but before that, for the first 21 years of his life, he had only left the country 1 time. And now he has traveled the world many times with the Sangha. He is living at Blue Cliff for a year as part of the residential practitioner program. We can share more about that later. Maybe some of you will also want to do that. Next we have Julian. Julian has just come back from co-facilitating a WakeUp Sangha in Hanoi, Vietnam for 7 months. And now he is going to Harvard soon for the next year. He's so fancy. To look at applications of mindfulness in education, so that's very exciting. Next to him we have Rob. Rob is a co-facilitator of Wake Up Toronto. Some of you are here from Toronto. If you ever come to visit us, please stop by. We practice every other Monday together in the evening. Fun fact about Rob, he's a cinematographer. So if you see him with his camera, you can smile and know he is enjoying photography meditation. And next we have Dave. As Dave says, he's enjoying wearing his party dress. And he is living here at Blue Cliff as an aspirant, and I asked him for a fun fact, and he shared that if he becomes a monastic, he will be the first one from the 5 boroughs near New York. Before we begin to go through the trainings with our panel, I just wanted to share a little bit for those of you who have never heard of them, and even for those of you who maybe have been practicing with them for years, just from my own experience, a little introduction to the 5 trainings. To begin with, a little bit of their history. These have come to us from a very long time and tradition, from the time of the Buddha, written down for lay practitioners as ways for them to follow the Dharma. We know that our monastic brothers and sisters practice many more precepts, so they have 250 for the brothers and 380 for the sisters. But we have these 5 for ourselves, and they have been revised 2 times by Thai and the Plum Village community. So they are very similar to what was originally written down for lay people many years ago. And these updates were to bring them kind of up to date, to make them very applicable. You'll hear words like websites in them. So of course that is an update from the time of the Buddha. But the essence of them is very similar. So it's a beautiful transmission that we are receiving. On Thursday morning, we heard a Dharma talk from Thai. We had it on a screen projected up here from this past June. And he shared about the trainings and what they meant. And I thought it was very beautiful, because sometimes when we hear the trainings for the first time, or maybe we've been practicing them for a while, they can become like rules. It can feel restricting. It can feel like we can never do it perfectly, and we can put a lot of judgment onto ourselves and also onto the trainings. And Tai shared in his talk that these are not restrictions, that they are ways to be free. And I thought that was really beautiful, because I see in myself that my actions can sometimes restrict me. My actions can trap me. I can get lost inside of my own actions when I don't know where to go. And when I have friends to guide me, and I think of the trainings like friends, gentle reminders, I can be free wherever I am. And so I thought that was a really beautiful word to apply to these trainings, as a way to be free wherever we are, not restrictions that we feel are heavy and we're carrying around with us. So with that, I'd like to read a quote. It's from the book Interbeing. It's from the intro. Dave was nice enough to write it out for me. So if I stumble, it's because of his beautiful writing. So this is the introduction. Mindfulness trainings are practices, not prohibitions. They do not restrict our freedom. They protect us, guarantee our liberty, and prevent us from getting entangled in difficulties and confusion. When we fail, we lift ourselves up and try to do our best. In fact, we can never succeed 100%. The mindfulness trainings are like the North Star. If we want to travel north, we can use the North Star to guide us, but we never expect to arrive at the North Star. I think this quote is a beautiful way to listen to our friends share today. We can remember that each of the trainings that they will read for us are just North Stars. We don't have to worry about getting there or breaking out every word. In fact, when we met yesterday to talk about their sharings, we decided, they won't go through them line by line, but just to share what their individual experiences have been. So with that, I'd like to invite you, if you've picked up the trainings, to put them down and not read along. You can read them later, and really just to let the words and the sharings that we're going to hear flow over us. This is another opportunity to practice our deep listening, to not, plan for the future or think about how they apply to our past, but just to be here, to hear what is said, and to just take it in and see what it does for us. And then later at the end, we can have some time to share maybe afterwards, and we'll do some questions and answers as well. Thank you.
Morning, everyone. I'm going to start by life. Aware of the suffering caused by the destruction of life, I'm committed to cultivating the insight of interbeing and compassion, and learning ways to protect the lives of people, animals, plants, and minerals. I'm determined not to kill, not to let others kill, and not to support any act of killing in the world, in my thinking or in my way of life. Seeing that harmful actions arise from anger, fear, greed, and intolerance, which in turn come from dualistic and discriminative thinking, I will cultivate openness, non-discrimination, and non-attachment to views in order to transform violence, fanaticism, and dogmatism in myself and in the world. Breathing in, I know that I feel anxiety in my heart and that it's pounding very quickly. Breathing out, I relax and smile. Trying to practice non-dualism with the Sangha. When I was first approached by Ellie to be a part of this panel, a few of us were trying to discuss which ones we would share about. Louder, okay. The first one was kind of left over because it was deemed not sexy enough. As Julian said, there's no meat in it. So many people think of this training as the vegetarian training, but it is very, as we hear, there's actually nothing explicitly about vegetarianism. I've took the trainings about 5 years ago now, and every single time I read this and the other trainings, they speak to me in different ways. I think that that's what makes them so special. Going back to vegetarianism, I think for me, this training was not really very attractive at first, just because I felt like I could already do it. If I thought of it as the vegetarian training, like, I already got that. But it is so much more reverence for life, and even deeper, this cultivating insight of interbeing and compassion. Very recently, I was asked by my doctor to, for health reasons, to start eating fish again, and for me, this was, I felt a lot of guilt about this, because I felt like I was breaking this rule of not eating meat. But I think when I read this deeply, I realize even vegetarianism sort of became a sort of dogma for me, and that I could, even though it's challenging, also be very, very mindful about how I take in even fish. For me, though, beyond the consumption part, what speaks to me these days is the last sentence about cultivating openness, non-discrimination, attachment to views in order to transform sort of fanaticism and dogmatism in myself. And at first I wanted to do training number 2 because I associate myself with, as you'll hear later, the training talks about oppression and social justice, and I've been involved in a lot of social activism and environmental activism, and so for me this was something, I was like, that's me. And I was like, oh, I can't believe I took this one instead. Like, what am I going to say? And it's kind of boring. Like, everyone here obviously knows it's good to like not kill things. But for me, I think when I look deeply at the heart of this work was cultivating the insight of interbeing and compassion, and learning to protect the lives of people, animals, plants, and minerals. So that was at the heart of it. But instead, when I attach myself to this idea of social justice and oppression, oftentimes I would get caught in this idea of like us and them, or us against them. Very recently, I moved back to New York after being in the Midwest for a while, and I heard that there was an anti-fracking protest in Albany in February. I know people are involved in that work, but so I decided I wanted to participate in that, but it's been a while since I had been involved in protests. And so when I got there, I was actually really shocked because I'd forgotten how angry protests were. And there are about 2,000 anti-fracking or environmental protesters trying to convince our governor to ban fracking in many rural districts in New York. And it was very interesting for me because at the core, I think we were trying to, protect the water and the communities that depend on the water and our environment. But the way that we expressed it was quite angry and violent. And I saw the legislators walking by as the group was screaming and chanting and starting to stick these signs in their faces. And I was I wonder how they feel. I know that our political system is such that oftentimes we feel that if we don't shout or we're not angry, we aren't heard. It was very interesting because I actually started developing a headache from being part of this, and I realized I couldn't really chant or scream, so I was walking away, and I realized I saw some protesters who had these signs that were, but weren't shouting, and they were there for, they were protesting against gun control. It's very interesting. Some of the people who are part of that party, their chants and the environmentalist chants, they sounded exactly the same. It's very, very interesting. The people who weren't chanting, I ended up just talking to them and asking them about, why they were there and what legislation they were there to speak of, and listening to why they were protesting against gun control. They said that it was, that they, used these tools, these guns, in a very, what they felt was a very, responsible manner, and, they were thinking about their families. For me, that was the first time I actually took the time to speak to someone that I felt I had very, very different, I would have very different views from, but in actuality, I realized that we were both very motivated. We're there because of this very deep-seated fear and this feeling that we weren't being heard. I realized my time is almost up. But I rejoice in the fact that all 5 of these trainings are completely interconnected. So whatever I did not get to talk about, my friends will talk about. And that makes me very happy. Thanks for listening.
Hello, friends. I'll read this second mindfulness training, True Happiness. Aware of the suffering caused by exploitation, social injustice, stealing, and oppression, I'm committed to practicing generosity in my thinking, speaking, and acting. I'm determined not to steal and not to possess anything that should belong to others. and I will share my time, energy, and material resources with those who are in need. I will practice looking deeply to see that the happiness and suffering of others are not separate from my own happiness and suffering. That true happiness is not possible without understanding and compassion, and that running after wealth, fame, power, and sensual pleasures can bring much suffering and despair. I'm aware that happiness depends on my mental attitude and not on external conditions, and that I can live happily in the present moment simply by remembering that I already have more than enough conditions to be happy. I'm committed to practicing right livelihood so that I can help reduce the suffering of living beings on Earth and reverse the process of global warming. So when we were sharing last night in the evening orientation about our aspiration for this weekend, I shared with my co-facilitator Ellie that my aspiration was to balance planning and organizing for the retreat, being involved in that aspect, and really being able to just appreciate and enjoy the activities and the people around. I find often my mind can be preoccupied with planning things. And so when I was told this morning, or found out this morning, that we needed a replacement for the 5 mindfulness trainings, I thought, perfect, an opportunity to practice. I haven't planned anything, so I have to just speak from the heart. And sometimes we have a saying here at Blue Cliff, or Dave and I have a saying called Zen Pop Quiz, which is opportunity to practice right away. This time it's in front of 100 people, so I'll try sharing from the heart, even though the heart's beating kind of fast. So there's a lot in this training, a lot of different areas around happiness. And yesterday, a group of facilitators, all of the people up here, and then as well as around six other facilitators and a couple monastics went on a adventure together in the morning. And at the end, we wanted to have a sharing, kind of an intimate circle together, and had asked it was getting kind of cold, so we asked if we could go inside and share inside, and the people were very accommodating, and they set up chairs for us, and we had this little really nice space to share together. And as you've seen here at Blue Cliff, we like to sing songs, and so we were singing some songs in this small space, and it had a beautiful resonance at the, what? Yeah, but it was inside. We were at a park, but we were inside. And this room had this beautiful resonance, but there were a couple people right outside the room who were on computers, and we thought we might be distracting them or interrupting them. But we had an idea to share, to sing a song to the park director who had allowed us into this beautiful space. So we thought, oh, we could sing maybe a song for her and ask her if it's okay. And some people have different reactions when you ask if they'd like to be sung to by a group of 15 people, especially when you're singing about happiness. Some people are like, not quite sure, and other people are very open. And we asked, and she said, great. She said, oh, well, let me pull my other friends in. They'd really like to hear this too. So she pulled the 2 people that were on the computer, and they came over, and a group of us together sang the song, Happiness is Here and Now. And the last line in the song is, nowhere to go, nothing to do, no longer in a hurry. Then the second verse, the end, says, somewhere to go, something to do, but I don't need to hurry. And when we sang the song, you could see visibly on their faces that they were quite moved. And after we finished, one of the guys who was at the computer said to us, oh, this is just what we were just talking about, was happiness and trying to be present. And then he said, yeah, if only there was a way to actually do that. And in that moment, I was filled with gratitude because I recognized that we do have a way to do that. We have a practice. We have these trainings. We have a path to support us in living out our aspiration. So that's part of what I view the 5 mindfulness trainings, and particularly this training on happiness, that recognizing that there is a path to practicing happiness. It's not just some idea or some thing that we post about on Facebook or talk with about our friends of like happiness is important or happiness is great, but it's really something that we live. And in order to do that, it requires practice and training. I really like the word training instead of precepts, because the training recognizing that this is something that we live every day and that we can practice in many ways throughout our lives. There's a line in this training about remembering that I already have enough, more than enough conditions to be happy. And that's something that I think is hard to touch all of the time. There's a classic thing that our teacher likes to say about not having a toothache. So you wake up in the morning and you say, oh, I'm happy I don't have a toothache. Most people don't think that. But when your tooth hurts for a while, and then the day when you wake up when you don't have a toothache, that's a great day. There's a lot to celebrate. You're not in pain. But to really practice that, to really keep watering the seeds of gratitude and happiness that exist, all of the conditions to be happy, whether it's blue sky, whether it's friends, whether it's some time and space to just be, not having a lot of things you have to rush to. You know, we're here for a short time, but this practice of being at the monastery can allow us to touch this training when we move a little bit slower, when we pay a little bit more attention to our daily activities. It can become more accessible to recognize that there are so many conditions of happiness. And practicing in this way, these small kind of daily tasks, our walking, our sitting, our eating, allows us to build our capacity, to build our space, so that when we face, as this training said, exploitation, social injustice, stealing, and oppression, which exist all over the world, that we have more space and that we don't become overwhelmed. I think I have a lot of appreciation for people who work within fields of social justice and recognize how important it is that they're able to take care of themselves in the process of taking care of other people. I think when you have a big heart, sometimes you just want to give. And if you don't pay attention to how much space you have to give in nourishing your own happiness, then you risk being burned out, overwhelmed, and that can detract from your intention to serve. And so in this practice of non-duality, these trainings is that when we are able to take care of ourselves, when we are able to brush our teeth mindfully and wake up with a smile on our face, that we are taking care of other people. Because when we do interact with them, when we do face those difficult situations, we've been watering the seeds of happiness, we've been watering the seeds of gratitude, and so we're more able to access that. And so when difficulties come in, we get some bad news, something's happening in the world, children are dying, that we've watered enough seeds of gratitude and happiness within us that we have space to take that in and to hold that without becoming overwhelmed by it. So I want to end by thanking you all for being here, for practicing with us together, and for taking an opportunity to nourish yourselves, and by extension, everyone around you. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to read the third mindfulness training called True Love. Aware of the suffering caused by sexual misconduct, I am committed to cultivating responsibility and learning ways to protect the safety and integrity of individuals, couples, families, and society. Knowing that sexual desire is not love, and that sexual activity motivated by craving always harms myself as well as others, I am determined not to engage in sexual relations without true love and a deep long-term commitment made known to my family and friends. I will do everything in my power to protect children from sexual abuse and to prevent couples and families from being broken by sexual misconduct. Seeing that body and mind are one, I am committed to learning appropriate ways to take care of my sexual energy and cultivating loving kindness, compassion, joy, and inclusiveness, which are the 4 basic elements of true love, for my greater happiness and the greater happiness of others. Practicing true love, we know that we will continue beautifully into the future. Well, you've already heard me sing, so it can't get any worse. I don't know why they picked me to do this one. I definitely got the sexy one. If I were to say that I struggled with any of these, this one I would say I struggled the most. It's the most entwined with my life, I think. On Thursday we had the day of mindfulness, and in the morning we listened to a talk by Tai. And he said the precepts create a zone of freedom. And I was really touched by that. I was wondering, what zone of freedom does this precept create? If you don't mind, we just go on a little adventure through my consciousness. I don't really know where this story is going. But it's up to date. It's almost still bleeding wounds here, but I think slightly scabbed, so we can get into it. So I'm in a relationship right now. I'm not a monk. It's a long-distance relationship. It's very complicated. I hope it won't be long distance for more than another month. It shouldn't be. Ellie told you that I was living in Hanoi last year. I was living with my girlfriend. We actually met through Plum Village. Sister Dee was there. She probably introduced us. And we didn't really have a lot of time together before we actually just went straight to living with each other. For financial reasons, it's a lot cheaper to live with somebody. But yeah, there were a lot of kinks to that relationship that we didn't fully work out until we left Vietnam to pursue other things. She lives in France, right near Plum Village, actually. Her parents live there. She's Dutch. And after we left Vietnam, she went straight back to Europe, and I went to Thailand for a while, and we had very little intention of living together again, which sounds dramatic. But we did have the intention of both being at the 21-day retreat in Plum Village in France, where some of our friends are here who are also on that retreat with me. Thanks for the support. And so when she was in France and I was in Thailand, we were having conversations, and there was a bit of suffering, and we were trying to be clear about a lot of things. And in my mind, not having any intention to live together, or actually the intention to live in very different continents for an indefinite amount of time, plus many times using the word breakup, we had a misunderstanding. And so, long story short, I thought we were broken up. She thought we were still together. Very intense. And so I hooked up with a friend of mine. It was fun. Not entirely fulfilling, but in the end, very painful. When I got to France, it was the first time I'd ever been in Plum Village. It's an incredible place. Definitely try to go there. We were both staying in the same hamlet, and we both found out that we were very much still in love. And so we had a lot of conversations, of course, trying to understand one another. And the whole time I was there, I was trying to practice really allowing myself to feel emotions. I think that's something that I've overlooked in my practice for years. I think maybe that's some kind of, I don't know, masculine priority or something like that, where we try to rationalize everything, to use our head and our conceptual thinking to solve problems. Such that I felt pretty dead inside. It was really only when I was listening to Tay give Dharma talks that I would feel huge swells of emotion, and I was like, why is that? And so my practice was to continue returning to my body, to feel the breath from the crown of my head down to my belly, the whole front, where we can learn so much. and just softening it repeatedly. Yeah, yoga definitely helped. Dave? Exercise. Almost propelled me as soon as we were apart to seek that kind of attention from another person. And that there were areas of our relationship that we weren't able to talk about, in part because I wasn't aware of them, that I was suffering, but that I was quelling suffering, It was like, come on, that's just like a feeling, that's not important. But that, suppressing emotions makes them come out pretty nasty afterwards. There's never enough time. So one of the things I learned through this process was that an entire area of our relationship surrounding sexuality had almost never been brought up. And I think part of that has to do with the fact that we met through a monastery where sexuality is like this kind of strange subject. There's a lot of celibate people walking around, and they're cool. But that it hadn't created a legitimate space for me to address, like, oh, here's a place where I feel uncomfortable, or not being able to talk about this creates suffering, for both of us. And one day we were Skyping because we were back in different continents. Again, I was here and she was in France, and we were planning, like, on getting back together, right? I told you in a month. And I was like, hey, let's bring this up. I'm feeling a little bit confident. I think I'm pretty aware that there's some suffering associated with this, and that if we don't get to the bottom of it, it's just going to keep coming back. So I started sharing with her, like, I don't feel entirely comfortable with our sexual relationship. I think this was, like, incredibly difficult to admit. Like, as guys, we have this, like, constant need or pressure to, like, be on, to, like, perform, if, like, your girl is not satisfied, it's your fault. And I was, like, buying into that super hard, and I was not really able to bring it up until very recently. But I've learned that opening that door has been life-changing for me. I rarely say that, I promise. And that even since we've just opened that door, my sense of fullness in our relationship has really emerged. That we haven't even had a single sexual encounter. I mean, she's still in France and I'm here, but this was through Skype. But that opening that door was where it's the beginning of that love entering a new place. And I think that for me, these trainings are about seeing where love and presence and mindfulness has not yet entered into your life. Which areas has it not fully pervaded? So this is a journey of love for me. Thank you.
Hello, dear friends. My name is Rob. I'm here to read and talk about the 4th mindfulness training. Loving speech and deep listening. Aware of the suffering caused by unmindful speech and the inability to listen to others, I am committed to cultivating loving speech and compassionate listening in order to relieve suffering and to promote reconciliation and peace in myself and among other people, ethnic and religious groups, and nations. Knowing that words can create happiness or suffering, I am committed to speaking truthfully, using words that inspire confidence, joy, and hope. When anger is manifesting in me, I am determined not to speak. I will practice mindful breathing and walking in order to recognize and to look deeply into my anger. I know that the roots of anger can be found in my wrong perceptions and lack of understanding of the suffering in myself and in the other person. I will speak and listen in a way that can help myself and the other person to transform suffering and see the way out of difficult situations. I am determined not to spread news that I do not know to be certain and not to utter words that can cause division or discord. I will practice right diligence to nourish my capacity for understanding, love, joy, and inclusiveness, and gradually transform anger, violence, and fear that lie deep in my consciousness. It's wonderful to be sitting up here with all of you, surrounded by friends and family. I think, like Julian, this of the 5 is maybe the one that's the most difficult for me. Something that I've had maybe the least amount of practice with or awareness of in my 27 years. I sit flanked by 2 of my favorite storytellers, so I'll do my best to live up to their wonderful words. In the Plum Village tradition of Dharma sharing, which we'll all get to practice, I believe, later today. This is a very important aspect of it, loving speech and deep listening. One of the things that many monastics say at the beginning of Dharma sharing is that if you're not sure that you want to share, but you feel your heart racing, that maybe that is the time to share. So I feel my heart racing. So I suppose now's the time. There's one sentence in here in particular that really speaks to me. I know that the roots of anger can be found in my wrong perceptions and lack of understanding of the suffering in myself and in the other person. I'm currently in a relationship. I actually recently got married to Ellie, who's down at the end there. And I remember a time in our relationship, especially before I had met the practice, where I would say, listening to you is not going to help me. Or me speaking to you about what's going on for me that's not what I need. I need to just go, be on my own, or I don't know what I thought would fix my suffering. At that time, it's kind of hard to remember, hard to imagine, probably because I didn't really have a strategy for transforming my own suffering. Tai has a wonderful book called Reconciliation, or Healing the Inner Child. It was a book that I think I saw the title after only maybe 2 weeks or 3 weeks of practice, and I thought, I should buy that book. So I bought it, only 3 or 4 weeks after meeting the practice, and I read it, and it helped me realize that many of my current difficulties stem from suffering that I had as a child and suffering that I had as a younger person. In this practice, we talk about seeds that are watered, that grow within us, and some lay dormant for a while, and then if it's a negative seed or something that you've had difficulty with, something can trigger that, and it can sprout up into your consciousness. So I had the thought that maybe there was something, if I were to look deeper into my idea that listening and speaking wouldn't help me, that maybe there was something in my childhood, maybe there was something from when I was younger that made me think that. I grew up in a family with lots of love. Both of my parents love me very much. I have 2 older brothers. My father has 6 siblings, and each of those siblings has a spouse and kids. My mother's family is much similar size. And they all get together very regularly, so there's lots of love being shared, there's lots of community, there's lots of joy. But looking back at my childhood, I realized that there wasn't very much listening to feelings, to emotions. There wasn't very much spoken between my parents about their own difficulties. I was never aware of any difficulty that my parents ever had. I think if they did speak about difficulties that they had in their relationship or in raising 3 boys, that if they did talk about it, it was behind closed doors. I wasn't aware of it. And often if I had some suffering or I had some difficulty, I didn't necessarily feel listened to. And maybe that was because I asked, I complained too much or something like that, or I don't know. But either way, in my head, the way that I felt was not listened to. And I tried to recognize that now without any blame for my parents or blame for myself. But I just recognize and remember that that was a real feeling that I had. I remember a moment very clearly. I was probably 14 or 15, having a discussion with my father. I don't even remember what it was about, but I clearly thought that I was right and that he was wrong, and that he should listen to my perspective about, why I thought A should be different from B. I remember where I was standing in my house. I remember what I was touching. I was standing in the back stairs that go from the kitchen outside, holding the railing. I remember having the thought, no matter how much I tried to logic or reason with my father, he won't listen, so there's no real reason for me to speak up anymore. There's no reason for me to try to have a discussion with him about why I would like something to be different. Most often when my parents would tell me to do something or tell me that this was the way something should be, there wasn't very much of an explanation. It was more, this is the way. And if I questioned it, it was just, we're the parents, this is what you have to do. So in remembering this story, I realized that maybe I conditioned myself to not listening to myself. If I had a thought about some suffering, without an avenue to express it to another person, I also hid from that myself. So this was maybe a year ago that I kind of remembered this story about myself and thought, I'm not sure that I've really listened to my own suffering, that I've really looked at my own difficulties. I remember often in my adolescent and adult life not knowing why I was suffering, having a difficulty, being stressed out, being worried, but knowing that I was feeling agitated, but not having any idea why. Sometimes Ellie would ask me, what's going on for you? And I just wouldn't know. So I think loving speech and deep listening, it really begins with, for me, it has really begun with me. And through trying to listen to myself, I've learned that I'm much more able to listen to Ellie in our relationship and listen to friends and family and really see and understand other people better as I begin to understand myself. Thank you for listening.
The fifth mindfulness training, nourishment and healing. Aware of the suffering caused by unmindful consumption, I am committed to cultivating good health, both physical and mental, for myself, my family, and my society, by practicing mindful eating, drinking, and consuming. I will practice looking deeply into how I consume the 4 kinds of nutriments, namely edible foods, sense impressions, volition, and consciousness. I am determined not to gamble or to use alcohol, drugs, or any other products which contain toxins, such as certain websites, electronic games, TV programs, films, magazines, books, and conversations. I will practice coming back to the present moment to be in touch with the refreshing, healing, and nourishing elements in me and around me. not letting regrets and sorrow drag back into the past. Pull me out of the present moment. I am determined not to try to cover up loneliness, anxiety, or other suffering by losing myself in consumption. I will contemplate interbeing and consume in a way that preserves peace, joy, and well-being in my body and consciousness, and in the collective body and consciousness of my family, my society, and the earth. Dear friends, my name is Dave, and first thing I want to say is how grateful I am right now. It's really amazing to sit up here and to feel the supportive energy, the love that you guys are sending us right now. It's beautiful beyond words. It's also really helpful for me, particularly in this moment, because I'm feeling kind of betrayed. I simultaneously need to use the restroom and have cotton mouth. Just never understood why my body can't figure that out. I realized that sitting here dressed like this and walking around the monastery smiling and hugging people, which is kind of my official job title, really messes with my street cred. You know, I'm up here, I want to talk to you guys about alcohol and drugs. So I got to tell you a little bit about before I got here. I was born and raised in the Bronx in New York City. I'm a little bit older than most of you guys. I just turned 41 on Wednesday, so that childhood happened in the 70s and 80s. And New York was kind of a rough joint. My dad was a raging alcoholic, born and raised in Ireland. So that just means he had an Irish accent. He was no different than any other raging alcoholic. When I got out of high school, I'd already been drinking in bars for 5 years. I joined the Marine Corps. I was a Marine for 5 years. And my unit was a combat deployable unit, but we never got sent to combat, and so we lost most of our men to drugs and alcohol. I was at more than one party where somebody didn't make it. There's a lot of ways to die when you're doing drugs, and I've seen a lot of them. Overdose, missing the balcony you're hopping from on the 6th floor of a hotel, drunken driving. But I didn't die, I made it. Fast forward to 10 years after that, I was in my early 30s, and I was starting to wind down my partying days at that stage. And I walked into a going away party for myself because I was moving back here to the East Coast after some years on the West Coast. I walked in the door, took a hit of ecstasy, ate a handful of mushrooms, took a few hits off a joint, spent the night drinking beer. That's how I was rolling. And I'm pretty sure there was a point, some point of that night when I was wearing a dress, but it wasn't this one. So about 6 months after that party, I went to a monastery for my first time. At that point, the East Coast monastery was in Vermont. And I had an experience very like the one you guys are having right now, I imagine. Kind of freaked out and blown away and suspicious. And I read these trainings and I really connected with this one. I looked at the way that I was using drugs and alcohol. And I should be clear, I was very, very lucky that I didn't have physical addiction. I didn't have the disease of alcoholism. Somehow that gene skipped me. So really the reason I was drinking and drugging as hard as I was here. I was in a lot of pain, and I was anesthetizing myself. Life was overwhelming me, and had been for as long as I could remember. And I took a real hard look at it that week in that monastery, and I realized that the times when I was partying the hardest, the times when I was making sure that I was not present, were the happiest times of my life. When I was surrounded by friends and family and loved ones. And the best moments, I wasn't there. And that kind of horrified me. And so I stopped. I gave up drinking and drugs. That was about 8 years ago. And I'm very happy I made that decision. It was very helpful for me to do it that way, at that time, that extremely. All of that worked for me personally. Not to say that it would work for you. But for me, that's really where the story begins. Because even though I didn't have a hard time having a six-pack of beer in the fridge and not having one, knowing that it was sitting there for when my buddies came over, I was lucky that way. What was difficult for me was dealing with my friends who were still drinking and using. And I wasn't prepared for that. And it was incredibly, incredibly difficult. Reconciling that was one of the hardest things I've ever done. The closer the person was to me, the more difficult the transition was for them. My own blood brother begged me to drink with him because he felt so abandoned. I had friends who were angry with me, who felt judged, who thought I was hurting them. It was incredibly painful. Simultaneously, I was in a lot of pain because I couldn't help but look at them and see their suffering because I had connected with that in myself. So I was sitting around with the people I loved, watching them party and laugh, and I was thinking, oh, she hates her job. They're getting a divorce. He's sick. And I'm supposed to be at a party. I found myself leaving places in tears because I couldn't reconcile it. And it was miserable. It was a very difficult, I would say, 2 years. And I just kept looking into it. And I couldn't figure out why they felt so judged, because in my conscious mind, I wasn't judging them. I was not sitting there thinking I was better than they were. And what I discovered, with a lot of help, with a lot of teachers and time, was that the reason they felt that judgment is because I was judging myself. Right? I had decided, oh, okay, this rule is a good way, and I'm going to do that now. And so by making that decision, by having that abandoning perspective, I had just decided that the whole 32 years of my life prior to that had been a mistake. And so I was sitting there looking at those people saying like, oh, you were such an idiot. How could you do that to yourself for all those years? I was just using this to beat myself like a club. And they could feel it. And they could feel it. And that's why they weren't comfortable. That's why they felt judged or shamed or just scared. So it wasn't until I started to recognize that this isn't that at all. That this is, as Ellie so eloquently said, this is a friend who's there to kind of help with the confusion. Right? The confusion when you're trying to connect your deepest intentions, your real desire for what kind of human being you want to be, loving, open, whatever the word is for you, and your actions. In between those two things, a lot of confusion. Somebody tells me to use the North Star as a guide, I end up on the top of a ladder. So, the reason I wanted to speak to you guys about this today is I wanted to share that this is not telling you to stop doing anything. This is not a rule that can be broken. This is not another dogmatic commandment that you can use to feel bad about yourself. I look back on it now and I realize that maybe if I hadn't been taking all that anesthesia in the form of drugs and alcohol, maybe my life would have been a lot worse. Maybe I would have killed myself. Maybe I would have killed somebody else. Maybe those drugs and those beers, all that running and hiding was exactly what I needed. Maybe that was the best I could do. And so now I wouldn't judge a person having a glass of wine with dinner after a hard day's work any more than I would judge somebody who was stressed out and needed to go for a run. We're all just doing the best that we can. And these things are here, these trainings are here to help us do that. Help kind of clarify things. Help remind us of the things we already think are really important. Thank you so much for listening.
Dear friends, I'd like to thank everyone for sharing from the heart. So nourishing to hear from all of you. It's so amazing. Every time I hear these trainings, I hear something new and I see something new. I have new aspirations come up. So sometimes we say it's a lifelong practice, and I see that so deeply. So thank you. We're almost at the end of our time. Maybe we have time for one or two questions before we go. Do we have a brother or sister that has a microphone? Okay. I will bring the microphone to you. If you have a question that we can ask to our panel, if you could raise your hand, I can bring the microphone to you. Anything you'd like to ask?
Hello, everybody. I'm Maxwell. Dear Sagna, dear Tai, however it goes, something like this. I had that burning desire that one of you talked about. It just came up in me. It's more of a comment. I just did the summer retreat in Plum Village, and I was very, very apprehensive about taking these precepts or trainings. I had the idea that there were rules and things, and I had one of the sisters tell me that to view them as a conversation. It's a conversation that you have with yourself and with others. And that made it very palpable. Like it really just resonated with me a lot to think about it as a conversation. So I just wanted to share that.
Does anyone else have a question that they would like to pose to the panel? And also, thank you for sharing, because I think lots come up, so we also may have a chance to share a bit about insights that we may have, or I saw many of you have taken these, so we will have time for Dharma sharing later as well, so that will be a wonderful time, just because we don't have too much time now, but if there's any questions that you would like to ask.
It was mentioned that one can feel guilt if we're not necessarily meeting one of the trainings, and I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about the internal dialogue you might have with yourself regarding guilt. So let's say you're in a situation where maybe you want a beer and you know, oh, I took the mindfulness training, but and you feel a conflict between the training and then maybe the craving for having a beer, or being in a social setting where everyone's having a beer. So I was wondering if anyone could talk a little bit more about guilt. Hello, dear friends. Just in case anybody didn't hear, our friend asked about the internal conversation that we might have with ourselves around guilt when having a beer or doing something that doesn't necessarily align with one of the 5 mindfulness trainings. I think that's probably something that we've all felt up here on this panel with regards to the 5 mindfulness trainings. And it's a difficult question. I think it's probably only a question that we can each answer for ourselves. So I can tell you a little bit about my own experience. I think if I've ever felt guilt about one of the trainings, maybe it would be, the vegetarian training or or mindful consumption. Quite early on after meeting the practice, I decided to try out being a vegetarian. And I continue to have that aspiration. Every once in a while I find myself in a situation where I don't have anything to nourish my body that feels like it will give me enough energy to last the rest of the day without eating some fish or some sort of seafood. I work in film, and so I work 12 to 14-hour days, often very physical days, carrying a camera or lifting heavy things.
And so recently I found myself out to a restaurant on a lunch, and we have a very short lunch. We have an hour lunch, but that's kind of quick to get in and out of a restaurant. And we were at a restaurant with the rest of the film crew, and there wasn't really a vegetarian option that had any protein. I could have gotten a salad or some vegetables, but I had already worked for 6 hours in the morning, and I knew that I needed to carry a camera for another 6 hours in the afternoon, and I was already feeling lightheaded and tired and a little bit dizzy from the morning. And so I decided to eat some fish. And I think the important thing to look at when you're feeling guilt is, I guess for me, it's more about why am I making a certain decision? Why am I choosing to have a drink of alcohol? Why am I choosing to have a beer? Why am I choosing to have a piece of seafood? And you have to think about whether or not that's right for you. These trainings, can be thought of as a path that leads towards a happier and more fulfilling life. And I see that with the right conditions, I do my best to practice all 5 of these trainings as much as I can. But if there are times where I don't see any other option, I may eat, a piece of fish, and not to feel guilty that I'm doing my best and I'm taking care of my body in the best way that I can. I'll touch briefly on alcohol. I generally don't drink anymore. For a while, I would carry around a mason jar full of mango juice when I would go to parties. And my friends just began to know me as that guy that has the jar full of mango juice. Like, who is that guy? I don't know why he's got mango juice, but he's having a good time, so he can just keep drinking his mango juice, I guess. But I looked at, when I was experimenting with these mindfulness trainings, I would have a beer, and I would look at how I felt when I was drinking. And I decided that for me, that wasn't something I wanted to feel anymore. That I wanted to be fully present with my friends, and I wanted to be fully aware of everything that was going on around me. When I was in those situations, I just wanted to chat with people. I just wanted to see them. So I think if you're feeling some guilt, take a look at it. You don't need to judge yourself or make any harsh, you don't need to chastise yourself, but just, if you feel that, just take a look and think about why you might feel that, and if that's something that you like feeling, and if not, how can you move forward tomorrow or right now in a way that brings you happiness.
Dear friends, we are at the end of our time, so I'd like to thank our panel again for sharing from their hearts. And I'd like to thank you for your beautiful listening. The way you sat, the way you listened, I think made it possible for us to be here. So we know as the speakers or facilitators that we are not separate from our Sangha who's supporting us. So thank you as well. We can uncross our